Good evening, everybody. I am really excited to share this Facebook Live interview with you guys tonight. This is in a similar but different vein from what you're probably seeing me talk a lot about. And so I'm just going to wait for my guest to connect and for Facebook to do its magic and alert people that I am live here. And it looks like we are good. At record timing because last time it took 5 minutes. Hello.
Hey Nicole, how you doing?
Doing great. I was super nervous because I did one on Monday and it took literally like 5 or 6 minutes for my guests to connect, and people were telling cryptocurrency jokes and trying to ease my pain. So
if it were on the blockchain, it would have been much easier, right?
Yeah, I'm sure. So I appreciate you jumping on tonight. And I think this is it's not only a hot topic that people need to have a better understanding of, but it's something that people are going to be really excited to learn a little bit more about. So I will just kind of introduce you as I know you, and then I'll let you kind of further that introduction. So Kendall and I actually met a couple of years ago at a conference down in Austin. And this was a conference that was, all the speakers were millionaire and billionaire entrepreneurs. It was one of the best that I've ever been to. It was amazing. And we connected. I think we went to like a group lunch or something one day and became Facebook friends. And over the last couple months, I guess we've kind of been seeing each other's posts on different things, cryptocurrency related. So we connected, we spoke a couple weeks ago, and Kendall's really working on some education pieces around the cryptocurrency space and that kind of thing. So I reached out to him again and said, why don't we do a little conversation on blockchain? Because I talk a lot about Bitcoin and that kind of thing. But maybe if you could just kind of share your background on like what you do now for work and that kind of thing.
Sure. Yeah, and that was a great conference a couple years ago. It kind of changed the course of, I think, a lot of different lives. It was really, really interesting. Yeah, what I do is career-wise, I'm in oil and gas. I've been in oil and gas for over 20 years now, primarily supply chain related, which is kind of how I got introduced into blockchain is through there was a conference here in Houston about a year ago, and it was primarily how the blockchain relates to oil and gas. It was a very small conference at Rice University, and someone that works on my team was actually asked to go to the conference. And I said, well, that looked kind of interesting. I knew a little bit about blockchain. I knew what it was by definition, but never been exposed to it. And through that conference, I became kind of immersed in the blockchain, and I've never left. So it was really an interesting conference because it was, let's say it was about a year ago in April. So at the time, I think Bitcoin was about $650. Ethereum was about $32 in that range. And some of the speakers there were guys like Joe Lubin, who was co-founded Ethereum. Had speakers there, the folks that founded Factom and Augur and lots of different storage, lots of different coins and lots of different applications and protocols. And so through listening to them for 2 days, I really became, I guess you could say a believer in the technology and then how it can be applied to business. So I left that conference, wanting to know more and wanting to understand more and wanting to invest, and speculate on the cryptocurrencies themselves.
Awesome. Yeah, I really enjoyed that story. Yeah, you told me, and crazy, even though Ethereum is kind of low right now, it's just crazy to think that last April where it was compared to where it is today.
It's kind of low now. It was 30. I think I started buying it at $32 or $34. So the fact that it's at $470 right now is, I think everything's relative. So I don't think it's low. I think I was so surprised when it got to 300. Right. So I guess it depends on perspective, but for me, I'm really happy that it's over 400.
Yeah, no, that's a pretty sweet ROI for sure. So maybe if you could it kind of describe what is a blockchain? What is blockchain technology?
Yeah, so blockchain essentially is a distributed ledger technology that is basically it's a decentralized technology that is immutable, which is important because if there are transactions that happen on the blockchain, for instance, let's say you and I have an agreement in a smart contract, let's say in an Ethereum contract, and you and I have an agreement that we're going to do a Facebook Live at 9 p.m. and we're going to try to obtain, I don't know, 1,000 likes during that Facebook Live. And if we do that, then you agree to pay me 1 Ethereum. All those transactions at that point are immutable, so they can never be erased, they can never be edited, they can never be modified. So the blockchain is a decentralized technology. In other words, there is no CEO over that transaction, and it's fully transparent to all users of that transaction. So if you and I had a smart contract on the blockchain, then you and I would have full visibility to all the transactions within that blockchain. It's fully transparent to anyone on the blockchain. And but having said that, it does have a modicum of privacy to it, because it could be fully transparent to the users of that contract, but it can still also have some privacy to it. There's a lot of privacy coins out there that specialize in that, but so it's very functional for things like where there's trust issues. So if there's two parties that essentially have a trust relationship, maybe they want to do business, but they have a reason to either, one, not trust each other fully, or the transaction is really complex and they're not sure when to pay or how to pay. The blockchain can resolve that because it makes everything fully transparent and it automatically triggers the payment. So I'll give you a real practical example. There's a friend of mine that he has two young daughters, and he actually pays their allowance, and he has for over a year in a smart contract. And every week or every month, however he has it set up, his daughters get paid an allowance. I think he pays it in Litecoin and Ethereum via a smart contract. So now and forevermore, they can always go back and look at those transactions, and their dad and their mom never have to remember to pay their allowance. It always happens at the same time, and it's the same amount until they change it, and it'll happen until they're 17, and at that point they can do things with it. They can unlock it, but it is completely locked until a certain point. So just a really practical, amazing, simple example of how you can use the blockchain to do daily stuff.
It's amazing. What a new world we're in. Yeah. And we're starting to see, a lot about blockchain, in terms of real estate transactions. I think Walmart's tracking now their, meat to make sure it's not expired on a blockchain. You and I had discussed when we spoke a few weeks ago, the implications it has on, the supply chain of the oil and gas industry and resolving disputes. So I think that this is very exciting, this space. So what would you say really most excites you about it? Like, what made you, because I know you're working on some things again for the oil and gas industry. You're working on some trading bot things, right, which I'll let you talk about in a second. But what got you super, super excited about this?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think there are a couple of things. I think first of all, the elephant in the room is kind of the market itself and the pricing. And when I got into it, there was a lot of speculation, and everyone was getting in to really just make money. I mean, they could see the market going up, and it was basically the beginning of the revolution of blockchain, so to speak. So I think there's some attraction there, obviously, because when you see Ethereum going from $30 to $1,400, that's a big draw. But for me, primarily, it was the business aspect of it. And I think this is what we're going to see in the future, is we're going to see blockchain being used as a business, as a business case. So it won't be necessarily there's a currency or a coin that is out there looking for a problem to solve. There will be a problem that needs to be solved, and blockchain will fit the solution, and it will just so happen to be on a blockchain. It won't necessarily be the way that it's invented or the way that it's brainstormed, but the blockchain is such a good fit for so many practical problems that eventually I think a lot of things will end up on the blockchain as a business case. So I'm really excited to see practical applications in business start to be used over the course of probably the next year or so. And before, what we were seeing was that, this is this great technology, but no one's really quite sure how to use it practically. I think we're going to start seeing that less and less of a problem over the next few months and next year or so.
Yeah. So for the people who are watching this, how do you see this technology starting to impact day-to-day lives of your average person?
Wow, that's a really good question. You hear a lot of different things, Nicole. You hear, about people, buying coffee with Bitcoin and the transactional side of it. I think there is an element to that. I honestly don't know how close we are to that. I practically would not probably use Bitcoin to buy my coffee because it would be the most expensive cup of coffee I've probably ever bought, right? Because I'm expecting Bitcoin to eventually go up, as it has, So I don't know how close we are to that. Like Litecoin, for instance, has a light pay, which they're using, and it's got some issues with it. So how close we are to the transactional side, I'm not 100% certain how close we are to that, but I think there's some practical applications that we can use and that we will see being used over the next few years. And I'll give you a really good example. It was about a year ago, like, for instance, my wife lost her birth certificate, or I probably lost it for her, actually. But anyway, we were doing some different things. We needed a birth certificate for something, and we couldn't find it. And if anybody's ever lost a birth certificate, you realize what a pain it is to get a new one. I mean, it's incredibly expensive. It takes weeks and weeks. In her case, it took months. It took a lot of phone calls, a lot of time. A practical application would be if that document was a birth certificate or a title for a house or what have you, if it's on the blockchain and it's immutable and you have the hash code to retrieve that document, you don't have to call anyone. You can just go to the blockchain, retrieve your document, and it's a true immutable document, so it can't be edited.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's some very, very practical applications, like if you work in real estate, if you've done title searches, very practical applications that will be seen. And there's people working on those things that I think eventually, Nicole, we will be doing things on the blockchain without realizing it's on the blockchain. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And we actually have a good question that ties into this. Chuck says, what are some jobs that will be lost due to blockchain, and what should people be training and educating themselves for future potential employment?
Wow. So jobs that will be lost due to the blockchain, that's a great question because of automation and AI and all the things that are happening. People are worried about job loss. Right.
And one of the things that, that I've heard about in some of my training is the potential for, like, example, a payroll department. Right. So instead of, let's say workers in a factory clocking in and clocking out every day, instead they would scan a QR code, start a smart contract, close the smart contract, and then at the end of the month or the week or whenever they get paid, the blockchain knows exactly how much to pay them, versus having, a whole department of people trying to figure that kind of thing out. So that's just one example that I've heard.
Yeah, companies spend a tremendous amount of money on settlement, right, on payment, and that could be resolved pretty easily on the blockchain and a smart contract. Regardless of the industry, it can be resolved very, very easily on the blockchain. And I think some of those jobs may eventually go away because of the technology, but honestly, they're going away anyway because of outsourcing. Companies are finding cheaper ways to do it, and they're just moving the jobs overseas. So the jobs are essentially being moved, typically anyway. I think what we will see, though, are more jobs being created because of the blockchain. And I'll give you a practical example would be, 15 years ago, did the job social media manager exist? It didn't exist. Like, there was no internet marketer, basically, 15 years ago. The conference that you and I went to was primarily based on internet marketing. That didn't exist, more or less, 15 years ago. It wouldn't have been possible. All the Amazon sellers and stuff that we know and associate with, 15 years ago, it was really non-existent. So those jobs have been created because of the technology. So I can't predict or know what jobs will be created because of blockchain technology, but we've got really good case studies that say there will be job creation that comes out of it, whether it's computer science or whether it's internet sales or marketing or what have you. But there'll be a lot of job creation that comes out of this one way or another.
Yeah, I had a meeting earlier today with a guy who is like a programmer and coder and that kind of thing. And he said in the blockchain space, there's about one person available, or wait, what was it? There's about one person available for every 16 jobs. So like there's a serious demand around people to work in this technology. And as you mentioned, artificial intelligence, I've heard a lot of implications for this around the sharing economy, things like Airbnb and Uber, and even renting cars, not having to talk to people, being able to start a smart contract, drive away with a car, return it, close the contract, that kind of thing. And then I think one of the things that's also really exciting, I always like to connect this to kind of the global picture, because again, I think blockchain in terms of like tangibility makes a lot of sense to people here in the US. Sometimes things like Bitcoin don't, because like you were saying, I'm not going to go spend my Bitcoin on coffee. That'll end up being like, $1,000 cup of coffee when Bitcoin goes to $100,000 or something crazy like that. And right now anyway, right? I really think after, after we all become users of this currency, obviously the game changes, but side note there. But I think one of the really exciting things, and I always like to bring it back to, the rest of the world, right? The world that doesn't live the way that we do. There have been many cases in different countries, Honduras, for example, where, families live on land and on property for generations, and suddenly the government wants that land, and they say, well, we know you've lived here, but our records show that my cousin owns this, so you need to get out. And it prevents those types of things from happening because it's irrefutable what's on the blockchain, which I think is that is so powerful for people who have everything ripped from them by essentially corruption. So that's one of the most exciting things to me.
That's a great example. And we just went through one recently with all the hurricane situation in Houston and surrounding areas south of Houston. So we have a lot of properties that are in the Rockport area, and they were damaged and devastated by hurricanes down there. And one of the things we realized out of that, through all the insurance claims and small business association claims, TWIA claims, title claims, all the different, and you wouldn't believe all the paperwork that we had to go through, and gathering up all those documents after a hurricane, after basically their records department had been opened up and all the documents had been strewn from, basically across the bay. It was incredibly difficult to get all that together. If it had been on the blockchain, for instance, if I had 30 properties that needed documentation, I would have it all available. So there's some real life practical examples, like especially when you're talking about real estate, insurance claims, contracts in general. There's some very real examples of which I think we're not very far away from having those come to light. It's just a matter of time.
Yeah, and I think it's very easy once you even have a basic understanding of the technology to see ways that this can work and solve problems that humans end up just arguing over now needlessly.
Right.
And we're getting a question: is that Kendall from Ryan Moran's tribe?
Yes. Shout out to Ryan Moran and the tribe. Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's exactly what we were just talking about. It's so funny how you kind of connect with people and then reconnect with people, because I remember you talking about your real estate investments, and it really got me thinking, actually. I was in the process of building my house at the time. So it's just, it's fun how these things come full circle. But so I guess, do you think that the majority of people here, people watching this, will be affected by this over the next couple of years, and in a positive way?
Yeah. So I think what we're seeing is probably the best analogy that I could see would be if you go back to the late 90s and you were using Netscape on your computer. And before Netscape came out, there was no browser, right? So you would access the internet however you did that. And then along came Netscape, and you had a browser to access the internet. And then through a series of events, you're using the internet every day, all the time, without even ever, like you're using your internet on the phone all the time, without ever actively realizing you're using the internet. It becomes integrated with the business. It becomes integrated with your life. It becomes integrated with everything that you're doing because of the tools that are now available, like Netscape and then Google and then so on and so forth. Those tools just haven't been developed yet for the blockchain. The blockchain is not incredibly user-friendly. If you're not sure how to use it, it takes a little bit of time to figure all those things out. Like if you wanted to go on and buy, let's say, a Bitcoin today, if you've never done that before, it can be pretty intimidating. I think in the next couple or 3 years, all of those things are going to become much, much, much easier once we get through regulation, and once institutional investment becomes feasible, then I think all those tools will be developed just as it is today, and it becomes much more practical. I think people will start seeing it. They may not realize they're on the blockchain when they're doing it, but things will become easier.
Yeah, and I think a lot of skeptics in this space like to point out all the problems, right? Like, oh, slow transaction times, transaction fees are going up, and everything's hard to find. Well, the internet is the best comparison, just like you said with Netscape. In 1997, people were saying the internet's never going to work,
Right.
so no one can find anything, right? But there's a solution to every single problem out there, and I think it's going to be a very exciting space to watch over the next couple of years. So, and he's saying that Tony
Bitcoin
Revere
Tony,
is
he's going to kill me for that.
they're crypto
Yeah,
fiends.
I wish I would have listened to Tony at our first conference when Tony started talking to me about Bitcoin in 2016. Tony is a Bitcoin and a crypto fiend. He knows this stuff. I think Tony is an economist. He knows the economy in general.
Yeah. Well, yeah. This is I get excited because I feel like the crazy person running around Asheville, which is where I live, talking about cryptocurrency. I just went to like a little business pitch party. There is nothing harder to explain in 60 seconds or less than Bitcoin. So I've been working on that, and you feel like you're this conspiracy theorist and all this
narco-capitalist
stuff. But yeah, but I think especially I have a lot of anticipation in terms of my financial investments around the next halving event and that kind of thing in 2020. But I think the next 2 to 4 years are just going to be so incredible, and I'm very excited to be really just introducing this topic to a lot of people. So what types of projects, I don't know what you can share or can't share, but what types of projects are you working on in the blockchain and cryptocurrency spaces?
There's a couple things. And to your point about the next couple of years, we're at a $300 billion market cap today, which if you go back to mid-December, it was 800 billion. Right. It was almost $1 trillion. Right. So there's a long runway on this thing, and to be at 300 billion today is, I think it's a great achievement, but there's a lot of runway left on this, and we've seen glimpses of that. So we know there's a lot of room there. So some of the projects we're working on today. One is something I can share is working with a business partner and a friend of mine on data collection system for oil and gas that would actually take data that's currently not available, but would be available, and then make it available on the blockchain and transparent to all users of that particular contract. So let's say, for instance, today in oil and gas, and you and I are engaged in a contract to do something on a well. The data that comes out of that project is typically locked away by someone somewhere in a software system, and it's not accessible or not available unless you specifically ask for it or buy it. And when you do get it back, it tends to be cleansed. Let's just say it's not exactly what you asked for. So what we're looking at is basically a historian for all the different elements that happen during that process, much like a flight data recorder would be on an airplane that records all the different things that happen during that project, and then hashes those onto the blockchain so they can never be edited. So if anything ever were to happen, good or bad, you can always go back to that and kind of recreate that with a paintbrush to say, this is what happened at this point in time, and this is what happened afterwards. It doesn't mean that one thing caused the other, but you can then recreate the picture, which is sometimes very, very difficult to do in the oil and gas environment. So it's basically a data historian for the oil and gas industry. So we're working on that. We're very excited about that. And some educational stuff, like you mentioned. There's been a lot of requests I've had to, hey, I want to get involved in investing in crypto, but how do I do that? And as you know, it's very, very possible to do very well investing in crypto, but it's always not very user friendly to get involved, and you can also come in at the wrong time and probably lose some money, or invest in the wrong projects and lose money. So that people are asking me, what can you do to help me? How do I use an exchange? How do I do these simple things? So I'm working on some things like that.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've helped a couple of people set up their wallets and sent them a little bit of Bitcoin, and they're always kind of like surprised by it can be complicated at first, but it's really not. And it's so fast, and it's kind of cool to experience that transaction for sure. I'm curious, just given your, this is kind of like totally a different topic, but I'm just curious, given what you do for work, what are your thoughts on the whole petrodollar thing that has just come into play?
Oh, the Venezuelan petrodollar?
No, with the Chinese yuan trying to take over the the global currency standard.
Yeah, so I'm probably the least qualified to talk about that at a global economic macro level, but I will say that the Chinese are very serious about what they're doing, and we should watch that very closely, because the United States in general is at risk of losing. I mean, the way I see it now is there's two major currencies in the world, and prior to this there was one. So, like I said, I'm the least qualified to speak on. Are we connected?
Yeah, they want to be the new global reserve currency. So that's pretty significant, bringing Russia, Iran, potentially Saudi Arabia, some other big countries. I do think it's really interesting that Venezuela is doing their own cryptocurrency, considering they were imprisoning people for life for using Bitcoin. I'm not sure if that's still happening.
I don't know if that was a real thing. Like I'm not even sure that. I don't know if that was a way for them to raise billions of dollars, or just if it was an actual real thing. I'm not sure. It may have been one of the biggest scams.
I don't know. I don't think. Yeah, well, and that's one of the reasons, I'm really excited about this space too, is because there are so many scams, and I really think that is the majority of what you're seeing in cryptocurrencies, or you're seeing ICOs and altcoins that aren't going to go anywhere. And it's really hard for people to, including myself, to decipher a good project and a valid project that will be profitable from one that just sounds good. Yeah. So I think we're going to see, some regulation coming into that space in particular. Although it sounds like, just from the things that I've heard, that the government is less interested in looking at things like Bitcoin and Ethereum, and a lot more interested in looking at, again, the ICOs.
Right. And I can understand that. I can understand that.
Is there any other? Yeah, I can as well. And is there anything else that you would like to share with our audience before we conclude?
Well, I would just say that I would encourage anyone that's interested in this space to spend some time looking at the crypto space in general, blockchain in general, because I think they're really kind of two different things, right? The crypto market is different than the blockchain technology, but like you mentioned, the first time you do a transaction with Bitcoin or Ethereum or Litecoin, it's kind of like one of those moments that you remember. It's like the first time you send an email, right? You remember that moment when it happens. So I would encourage anyone that if they're not currently involved in that, to test it out. I mean, you don't have to spend a lot of money or invest a lot of money to buy a tenth of a Litecoin. But once you do that transaction, and once you see what's possible through that transaction, and how fast it is, how inexpensive it is, how easy it is, it kind of opens up a whole new world, and it's hard to explain it until you actually experience it, right?
Yeah, it's this like super mysterious thing, but honestly, I don't find it to be all that different from like a PayPal transaction at this point. It's important to understand the difference between the two. People, because I hear a lot of people say, "Oh, well, it's like PayPal, or it's like Venmo." Well, no, those are only available in like a very small number of countries. First of all, they're also centralized third parties. They also have high transaction fees, and so on and so forth. So very different things. But I talk to a lot of people about crypto every week, whether it's online, whether it's in networking, and a lot of people, like, there are very few times that I walk into a room now where not one person has heard the word Bitcoin before.
Right.
And so, but there's still not a lot of understanding. And I read a survey or a report on like a study that was done recently in the US on people who were interested in cryptocurrency. But again, it's like 1% of the world, and people just aren't doing anything about it because they don't understand. And understanding takes some time, right? This isn't something you watch a YouTube video and then you just suddenly get it, right? This is what I know is now the culmination of many weeks spending about 50 hours a week on YouTube and reading and learning everything that I could. And most people aren't going to be willing to put in that time. But reality is I truly believe that this is our future, and it's not our future 20 years from now. It's our future like 2 years from now, if not sooner. And those who listen up and pay attention and are on the forefront of this, because we are still in early adoption phase,
very early,
very early, have like the once in a lifetime opportunity here. And for people who ignore it or think they don't have time to research it or think it's a scam or a Ponzi or whatever, or you listen to mainstream media because they have no idea how to report on this thing, you are missing the biggest opportunity of your lifetime to make some serious money and to be on the forefront of technology. So that's all I'll say.
I agree.
Sounds like you back it up.
I agree 100%. I mean, I'm super excited still about Ethereum. I know it's 400, almost $500 now, but I'm still super excited about Ethereum. I'm super excited about some other projects. There's several projects I'm really excited about. I will say that like there's almost 1,600 coins on CoinMarketCap. I will say that I think eventually we're going to be dealing with a handful of winners that come out of this. So like you mentioned before, I think it's very important to evaluate those projects and really dig into them, because over the long term, I think we'll have some winners out of that, but I think there's going to be a handful, not 1,600 for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And, my advice is don't just like go buying coins because your friend said, or you saw a Facebook article shared. Like, you really need to do your research. You're most likely safe, if you're in the big coins like Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Litecoin, Monero, Zcash, all of those things. But yeah, don't go playing in altcoins without.
I always said when your grandmother's
education.
asking you to buy Tron, that's. It may be time. It may be time to pause at that point. when your great aunt is asking you how to buy Ripple, it may be time to pause at that point, right?
Yeah, and really, understanding what these coins represent, what they're all about. Actually had someone say to me today or yesterday that Bitcoin was created for crime. Like, it was created for the Silk Road. I'm like, no, that's not exactly what happened.
Right.
So there's a lot of misconceptions out there. So do your due diligence, educate yourself. This is a very important space. It's a very exciting space to be in. And you can reach out to either of us if you have any questions that come up later, or just post them here as well, because we'll get those notifications. And Crypto for Life with a rainbow. I love it.
I love that. All right. Thank you.
I agree. Yeah, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your knowledge and that real world example of using blockchain to recover things like documents that are lost during hurricanes. I mean, it's like a no-brainer. So I'm really excited to stay in touch as the space evolves and to hear about all the projects that you have going on, and look forward to connecting again soon.
Okay, thanks, Nicole. All right,
have a good night.
Have a good night. All right.
Bye, everyone.